Imagine being the daughter of one of history's most famous poets, yet never meeting him. That was just the beginning of Ada Lovelace's tragic tale. Her life was a series of what-ifs and if-onlys, punctuated by flashes of brilliance that would change the world. If only the world had been ready to listen. Ada Lovelace was born on December 10th of 1815 to the famous poet Lord Byron and his wife Annabella Milbank. But this wasn't your typical happy family. The marriage was a disaster from the start. Byron, known for his wild ways and scandalous affairs, couldn't settle into a married life. And Annabella? Well, she couldn't handle her husband's antics. Just a month after Ada's birth, the couple separated. Little Ada never saw her father again. Can you imagine the impact this family drama had on her future? As we'll see, it set the stage for a life filled with brilliance, loneliness, and tragedy. But that's just the beginning of Ada's story. With her father out of the picture, Ada's life took a turn that would shape her destiny in ways that no one could have ever imagined. Her mother, Annabella, was determined to erase every trace of Byron's influence from her daughter's life, but little did she know, her obsessive efforts would create a childhood unlike any other. Annabella had a plan, and it was as rigid as iron. She was going to mold Ada into the perfect, logical thinker, the complete opposite of her wild and passionate father. Math, science, and cold hard facts became Ada's daily bread and butter. It was as if Annabelle was trying to math the Byron right out of her daughter. But here's the kicker. This strict regimen didn't crush Ada's spirit, it instead ignited a spark of genius that would change the world. At 12 years old, Ada embarked on a project that would make most adults scratch their heads in confusion. She called it flyology. Now, you might be thinking, flyology? What in the world is that? Well, hold on to your hats, because this is where things get interesting. Little Ada, in all her precious glory, decided that she was going to crack the code of human flight. She studied bird anatomy, experimented with different materials, and even compiled her findings into a book. Talk about an overachiever. But Ada's childhood wasn't all equations and bird wings. There was a darker side to her story that shaped her just as much as her mother's strict teachings. You see, Ada was plagued by illness. We're not talking about the sniffles here. These were serious, debilitating conditions that left her bedridden for long stretches of time. Imagine being a young girl bursting with ideas and curiosity, but trapped in a body that constantly betrayed you. Ada suffered from severe headaches that sometimes robbed her of her vision. And as if that wasn't enough, a bout of measles left her paralyzed for nearly a year. It's enough to make anyone give up, but not our Ada. In a twist of fate, these periods of isolation may have been the secret ingredient in Ada's intellectual development. Confined to her bed with nothing but her thoughts and books for company, she dove deep into the world of numbers and logic. It was as if her mind was making up for what her body couldn't do. Ada herself seemed to understand the duality of her upbringing. In a moment of reflection, she once said, "If you can't give me poetry, at least give me poetical science." It was a cry for balance, a recognition that her mother's strict regime had left a void in her life. But here's the real kicker. All of this, the strict upbringing, the focus on logic, the illness, the isolation, was setting the stage for something big. Ada was developing a unique way of thinking that would one day revolutionize the world of technology. She was becoming a perfect bridge between the world of cold, hard facts and the realm of imagination. Little did anyone know, this unusual childhood was molding Ada into the perfect person to envision a future that nobody else could see. A future where machines could think, where numbers could create art. A future that, at the time, seemed as impossible as a little girl figuring out how to fly. Ada's childhood may have been unconventional, but her youth was about to take an even wilder turn. At just 17, she found herself embroiled in a scandalous affair with one of her tutors. And if that wasn't enough to set tongues wagging, she even hatched a plan to elope. But her mother, ever the protector of the family's reputation, quickly put a stop to that nonsense. But life had a funny way of working out for Ada. Just when it seemed like she might be heading down a path of scandal and ruin, fate stepped in. In 1833, at another one of those extravagant parties the upper crust was so fond of, Ada met a man who would change her life forever. His name? Charles Babbage. Now, you might be thinking, who's this Babbage fellow? Well, at first glance, he wasn't much to look at, a middle-aged lecturer, unemployed to boot. But Ada saw something in him that others missed. She recognized a kindred spirit, a visionary mind that matched her own. Babbage's difference engine captivated Ada's imagination. She started visiting him regularly, picking his brain about this strange contraption. Babbage was so impressed by her intellect that he dubbed her his Enchantress of Numbers. Little did they know, this was the beginning of a partnership that would change the course of history. But don't go thinking that Ada's life suddenly became all about numbers and machines. Oh no, she had other plans too. In 1835, at the tender age of 19, she tied the knot with William King. 3 years later, he became the Earl of Lovelace, making Ada a bona fide countess. Talk about a fairy tale, right? Well, not quite. Ada soon found herself juggling the demands of an aristocratic life and motherhood. She had 3 children in quick succession. But here's where things get really interesting. Most women of her time would have been content with their lot. A titled husband, healthy children, a life of luxury. But not our Ada. After her 3rd child was born, Ada decided it was high time to dust off her mathematical skills. She threw herself back into her work with Babbage, assisting him with the latest creation, the analytical engine. Now this is where Ada's story takes a turn from merely interesting to downright revolutionary. She translated an article about Babbage's machine, written by some Italian chap named Luigi Menabrea. But Ada didn't just translate. Oh no, she added her own notes. And get this, her notes were 3 times longer than the original article. In these notes, particularly one called Note G, Ada did something extraordinary. She described how to use the analytical engine to calculate something called Bernoulli numbers. It doesn't sound like much, but this little piece of writing is now considered the world's first computer algorithm. That's right, Ada Lovelace wrote the first computer program in history. Her husband William was actually pretty cool about all this. He was proud of her work, even called it genius. That was pretty progressive for a time when most folks thought women had no business meddling in science. But don't go thinking it was all smooth sailing from here on out. Ada's life was about to take some dark turns. Despite her incredible achievements, she was still a woman in a man's world, and that world wasn't quite ready for the likes of Ada Lovelace. The challenges she'd face in the coming years would test her in ways that she had never imagined. But that's a story for another time. Ada Lovelace's brilliant mind was trapped in a body that seemed determined to betray her at every turn. While her intellect soared to new heights, her health was a constant struggle that threatened to clip her wings. From childhood, Ada battled debilitating illnesses that would have crushed a lesser spirit, but our Ada, she wasn't about to let a little thing like constant pain stop her from changing the world. Picture this. A young woman, her head filled with revolutionary ideas, confined to her bed for months on end. That was Ada's reality. She suffered from excruciating headaches that sometimes robbed her of her vision, and as if that wasn't enough, a nasty bout of measles left her paralyzed for nearly a year as a teenager. Talk about a rough start in life. But Ada's health woes didn't just end with childhood. Oh no. They followed her into adulthood like an unwelcome shadow. After the birth of her 2nd child, Annabella, Ada was struck down by a mysterious illness that left her in agony for months. It was as if her body was rebelling against the brilliance of her mind. Yet, despite these constant setbacks, Ada's intellect refused to be dimmed. She threw herself into her work with a passion that bordered on obsession. But here's where things take the dark turn. In the 1840s, Ada developed a new kind of addiction, one that had nothing to do with numbers or machines. She became hooked on gambling. Now, you might think that surely a mathematical genius like Ada could beat the odds. Well, think again. Ada lost a fortune betting on horse races. We're talking over £3,000. That's about £300,000 in today's money. She even tried to use her mathematical skills to create a foolproof gambling system. Spoiler alert, it didn't work. Her efforts failed spectacularly, leaving her drowning in debt and with some awkward explaining to do to her husband. But Ada's struggles weren't just personal. She was a woman in a man's world. And boy, did that world make things difficult for her. Imagine being one of the brightest minds of your generation, only to be denied access to important resources like the Royal Society Library. It's enough to make anyone want to scream in frustration. And let's not forget the juggling act that Ada had to perform. She wasn't just a mathematician and a visionary, she was also a wife and a mother. Ada had 3 children in quick succession, and for a while, diapers and domestic duties kept her too busy for mathematics. It wasn't until after the birth of her 3rd child that she finally found time to return to her beloved numbers. As the years went by, Ada's health continued to deteriorate. By the 1850s, she received a devastating diagnosis: cancer. The brilliant mind that had once envisioned the future of computing was now trapped in a body ravaged by disease. Ada turned to opiates to manage the intense pain, all while becoming increasingly obsessed with developing a mathematical model of the human brain, a project she would never complete. In her final moments, Ada became more and more isolated. Her relationship with her children was strained, and even her husband abandoned her after a mysterious confession on her deathbed. The woman who had once been hailed as the enchantress of numbers was now alone, her brilliant light fading far too soon. Ada Lovelace's life was a roller coaster of brilliant ideas and crushing setbacks, but as her health began to fail, she embarked on her most ambitious project yet. Ada became obsessed with creating a mathematical model of the brain, which she called a calculus of the nervous system. It was as if she was trying to understand the very essence of human thought. In 1844, Ada's quest for knowledge led her to visit scientist Andrew Cross. She was fascinated by his experiments with electricity, hoping they might unlock the secrets of the brain's inner workings. But little did Ada know, time was not on her side. As the 1850s rolled in, Ada received devastating news. She was diagnosed with uterine cancer, a disease that would ultimately claim her life. But even as her body weakened, her mind remained as sharp as ever. She continued to work on her mathematical pursuits, refusing to let her illness slow her down. The pain became unbearable, and Ada turned to opiates for relief. Her once bustling life became increasingly isolated. Her mother took over her care, and Ada's relationship with her own children grew strained. It was a sad turn of events for a woman who had once been at the centre of London's intellectual circles. But the worst was yet to come. On August 30th, 1852, Ada made a mysterious confession to her husband, William. Whatever she said was so shocking that William left her bedside and never returned. Some historians think she might have admitted to an affair. We'll never know for sure, but it's clear that Ada's final days were filled with loneliness and regret. On November 27, 1852, Ada Lovelace passed away. She was only 36 years old. In a final act of defiance against her mother's wishes, Ada requested to be buried next to her father, Lord Byron. It was a poignant end to a life marked by the constant push and pull between her parents' legacies. Ada's funeral was a small, quiet affair. Notably absent were her longtime friend Charles Babbage and her mother. It seemed that even in death, Ada couldn't escape the drama that had followed her through life. After her passing, Ada's groundbreaking work was largely forgotten. It would take nearly a century for her contributions to be fully recognized, but Ada seemed to have a premonition of her future importance. In a letter to Babbage, she once wrote, "That brain of mine is something more than merely mortal, as time will show." And time did show. Ada's notes were later used by Alan Turing when he was conceptualizing the first computer. In the 1980s, the US Department of Defense even named a computer software language Ada in her honor. It turns out that the woman who had been overlooked for so long would eventually be hailed as a pioneer of the computer age. Ada Lovelace's life was cut tragically short, but her legacy was just beginning. The brilliant mind that had once dreamed of flying and unraveling the mysteries of the human brain would go on to inspire generations of scientists and mathematicians, but that's a story for another time. Ada Lovelace's story didn't end with her death. In fact, you could say that it was just the beginning. For nearly a century, her groundbreaking work gathered dust, forgotten by a world that was not ready for her genius. But as computers began to revolutionize society, people started to take notice of Ada's forgotten legacy. It turns out Ada's notes weren't just ahead of their time, they were practically prophetic. Alan Turing, the father of modern computing, used her work when developing the first computer. Talk about a posthumous mic drop. But Ada's influence didn't stop there. In the 1980s, the US Department of Defense did something that would have made Ada's mathematical heart skip a beat. They named a new computer programming language after her. The Ada language became a staple in military and commercial software, cementing her place in tech history.